Draft season is here, and you're not sure what the best strategy to use is to dominate your draft. Well, don't worry, I am here to help. Today, we're going to uncover the double hero running back draft strategy, what it is, how to use it, what leagues you should use it in, and how to make sure you dominate your draft using this strategy. So let's start with the obvious question, what is double hero RB? Well, it's just a fancy way of saying you draft two running backs in the early rounds, generally in the first and second round, because we're trying to get two absolute stud running backs who can carry our fantasy team all season long. Now, there's obviously some debate if you draft a running back in the first round and the third round, or the second round and the third round, or the first round and the fourth round, is that still double hero RB? Who cares, right? These are kind of debates that people just like to have in fantasy. I think what's really important is you get two absolute stud running backs in those early rounds, and that's generally going to require you to draft one in round one and round two. Now, what kind of leagues would benefit from this double hero RB strategy? Well, the first one obviously is any kind of non-PPR league. If you're in a non-PPR league, not half PPR, not full PPR, you shouldn't just be going double hero RB. You should probably be grabbing a running back in the first 3, 4, maybe even 5 rounds of your fantasy draft, depending on who is there. Other leagues that would benefit from this are half PPR leagues. Even though it still helps wide receivers in half PPR, they don't quite have the advantage they do in full PPR. So in a half PPR league, double hero RB is also a viable strategy. I'll also say, in any 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 QB, 1 tight end, 1 flex league, double hero RB can be a great strategy. I've used it many times in my home leagues with great success. It doesn't matter if it's standard scoring, half PPR, or full PPR. Because you only need 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, drafting 2 early running backs doesn't set you back at the other positions, and you can still build a monster team that can win the championship. And then the last one I'll say, for those of you who play best ball, this is obviously a great strategy in that format as well, because you can't go out to the waiver wire and grab the latest handcuff running back or the rookie who's coming on late in the season. There are no waiver wire, so having 2 stud running backs who can carry you week in and week out for the entire season in that type of format is a massive advantage. Which reminds me, we've once again partnered with Underdog Fantasy. If you want to get some last minute drafts in that won't impact your redraft leagues, because you don't have to set your lineup, make waiver claims, try to orchestrate trades, you just draft and then wait, and you can play for a chance to win millions of dollars in these prize pools on Underdog Fantasy. You can join tournaments for as little as $5 per entry. Draft as many fantasy teams as you want. It won't matter because it takes no work during the season. And if you join using code Endgame now, they will match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Free money in your account just for signing up. And you get to do a bunch of fantasy football drafts. It's a ton of fun. You can potentially win a ton of money. It's a blast. Underdog Fantasy Sports. Check it out. Use promo code Endgame for that deposit bonus. All right, so now that we know what double hero RB is and what leagues would benefit from it, why would we want to use it in 2023? Well, the main reason is running back value is probably at one of the lowest points I've ever seen it, maybe since back in 2015 after the running back apocalypse of 2014. There are a lot of stud, proven running backs going in the second round of drafts, sometimes even in the third round of drafts, that just usually aren't there in fantasy drafts. So while your other league mates are going wide receiver early, maybe going QB early this year, you can potentially grab 2 stud running backs that can anchor your team week in and week out and carry you to that championship. All right, so now for the most important part, how do you actually implement this draft strategy? Well, like I said, you got to draft 2 early stud running backs, but you want to focus on the right running backs. You want 2 guys who can potentially be the top scoring running back in fantasy football this year. Obviously, any of the running backs going in the first round, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, and Bijan Robinson would be great starts to your fantasy draft for a double hero RB team. When you get to the second round, the running backs I would prefer would be Saquon Barkley or Tony Pollard. I think both these guys have the potential for an RB1 type season, at least a top 5 season. So if one of your first round running backs hit and these guys either are top 1 or top 5, you're going to be loaded at the running back position. I'd also consider running backs like Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, assuming he plays, of course, and Jonathan Taylor, assuming he plays, of course, later in the second round as well for a double hero RB build. Now, once you have your 2 running backs that are going to carry your team all season long, it's time to ignore running backs for a bit and attack wide receiver, tight end, and QB. You want to really spend these next few rounds getting really good wide receivers, maybe an elite QB, and maybe an elite tight end if they fall. Resist the urge to draft some decent running back that may still be on the board or may still fall to you because you have 2 really good ones who are going to carry you all season long anyways. Remember, this strategy hinges on your 2 running backs producing all season long. If you lose one of your running backs to injury or they bust, it doesn't matter if you drafted some decent running back in the middle rounds who's putting up low-end RB2 production. It's not going to save your squad. Don't worry about running backs in these kind of middle, early-ish rounds. Once you have your 2 studs, you can come back to running back later in the draft, get some upside guys, some handcuff guys that potentially could fill in should you lose one of your top 2 running backs. Now let's look at a very good example of a double hero RB team that was drafted by one of our members, Keith, in one of our mock drafts. Now, this is a 1 QB, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 flex, full PPR league, but you'll see, even in full PPR leagues, this can be a powerful strategy. So we started with Bijan Robinson at the 101, which if you're going to take a running back in the first round, he's the one I want. The 101 may be a bit early for me, but I don't hate it if you're going double hero RB. Then you got Josh Jacobs right at the end of the second round. Now, of course, it's predicated on Josh Jacobs actually playing this year. I probably would have preferred Tony Pollard, but at the time, Josh Jacobs had a lot of value. If he plays, he'll be great as his RB2. But then look at what he does after he grabs these 2 running backs. He grabs an elite QB in Jalen Hurts. Now he has 2 incredible running backs and an elite QB. Then he follows that up with 3 high upside wide receivers. Mike Williams, you may not like him, you may feel he's too boom bust, injury prone, but he's got a ton of upside, which is what you're looking for in this type of build. Then he grabs Brandon Ayuk, another kind of boom bust, volatile guy with a ton of upside, and second year player, Jahan Dotson, another guy who should have massive weekly upside. You don't want to chase safe, boring wide receivers when you've gone with a double hero RB build because your 2 running backs should give you a high weekly floor. Then he grabs an elite tight end with Dallas Goedert, love it in this format, and then he grabs another potential high upside wide receiver in rookie Quentin Johnston. Finally, he goes back to running back and he gets guys like Rashad Penny, who could be the starter in Philadelphia, have a sizable role, Tank Bigsby, who could have a role in Jacksonville, guys with potential upside because he's not looking for players who can start for him right away in week 1 because he already has 2 stud running backs. And then he finishes his draft with a couple high upside shots at wide receiver, which is totally fine. But you can see the power of this. He has 2 stud running backs, he has an elite QB, he has a top 5 tight end, and he has 3 high upside wide receivers, 2 of which will start for him and 1 of which will be his flex. This is a team that on any given week can be one of the highest scoring teams, if not the highest scoring team, and also has a relatively high floor with his stud running backs and QB. All right, and finally, what mistakes do I see with double hero RB drafters? Well, number 1 is not getting 2 stud running backs. So maybe in the first round, they draft Christian McCaffrey, Bijan, Austin Eckler, whoever. Then in the second round, they go wide receiver. And then in the third round, they go with somebody like Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, guys who will probably be good this year, but not great. That's just not what you're looking for with this strategy. You want 2 absolute stud running backs who can carry you every single week. The other big problem I see, which I kind of mentioned, is not attacking wide receiver enough in those next few rounds. Because you already have 2 stud running backs, you need to play catch up at the wide receiver position. It doesn't make sense to then grab a wide receiver in round 3 and then go, oh, hey, there's a decent running back on the board in round 4. Let me get him. And now you're really bad at the wide receiver position. You're missing the upside at the wide receiver position. And even though you have those 2 stud running backs, the rest of your roster kind of lacks. And then I also kind of mentioned this, but another big mistake I see is drafting safe, high floor wide receivers over more volatile, high upside wide receivers. You already have a pretty good floor week in and week out with your 2 running backs. You don't need more floor, you need more ceiling. Target wide receivers that have those massive weekly ceilings that can take your team from being really good to unbeatable on a weekly basis. And then finally, as I showed in the previous example with Keith, don't ignore QB and tight end just because you went running back early and now you feel like you need to get some wide receivers. If you can get an elite QB like Jalen Hurts, just like Keith did, do it. Or if you can get an elite tight end like Dallas Goedert in the middle parts of your draft, do it. Fantasy football is still about scoring the most points and beating your league mates every single week, and you want to put together the best possible team, so don't ignore the other positions just because you went running back heavy and now you feel you need to play catch up at wide receiver. Now you're ready to implement double hero RB and crush your leagues, but which running back should you be targeting in those early rounds? Find out here.